Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time we get started. Thank you for being here. I'm Kirby Lambert. I'm with the Outreach and Interpretation Program here at the Historical Society, and we're happy that you're here. So today we are going to hear from Helena journalist and author Brian D'Ambrosio. He's written more than 500 articles for publications as diverse as USA Today, High Country News, Sunset, the Smithsonian, and Backpacker Magazine. He has also authored 11 books, at least that's what I could count online. He said it might be a little bit more than that, actually, focusing on sports and sports figures, Montana adventures, actor Charles Bronson, and poetry. But today's subject, we're going to hear about Shot and Montana, a brief history of Big Sky cinema. Brian? Oh, and because I so often forget, we will be selling these in the store afterwards if anybody's interested, the book, and I'm sure Brian would be more than happy to sign copies if anybody's interested.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for coming. So I have a tendency to talk really, really low. So if I'm not talking loud enough, just kind of tell me to pipe up okay, or just kind of wave to me. And oddly enough, with that smoke, I've ended up with a little bit of a raspy throat today, oddly enough, too. So if you have any problem listening, any problem with my decibel level or volume level, just tell me to pitch it up a little bit, okay? So, well, thanks for coming. So I have a tendency to, I guess, kind of, as most writers do, be a little bit of a hermit and a little bit of a wallflower. So I'm going to talk a little bit, but I'm going to let the words speak for themselves. So I'm going to read and kind of mix it up, and maybe take some questions at the end if you have any questions about any film or actor or event in particular. So I guess the best way to start this off is that I always considered Montana like a feast kind of for filmmakers. So I'd been working as a freelancer for a number of years doing some stories. So I kind of delved into some of the older movies that had been filmed here and some of the more obscure ones, and I started looking around and I realized that there was enough material for an entire book. So I wanted to start off kind of talking about one of the things that makes Montana really interesting is that Montana is a doppelganger for many places, and is served as a doppelganger for many places, from Norway to China, and it's doubled as itself in Montana. So I'm going to read to you some of the location sites in some of the films real briefly. So location sites have been far-flung and varied. Director Steven Spielberg made his first cinematic foray into adult romance in Libby with Always. So if you know any of the movies too, you can shake your head or smile, or if you have a connection to them, okay? Montana filled the need for a flaming forest in Spielberg's story of forest fire retardant bomber pilots. For a while, those connected with Always thought they'd always be searching for the right location. It was over a year's time before Spielberg and company finally settled on Libby as the primary backdrop. The dramatic story was enhanced by the 1988 fires in Yellowstone National Park, which provided Spielberg the opportunity to capture footage of an actual fire. The state has been the Midwest Canadian border in The Untouchables, Morocco in the climactic ending of the horse and cowboy adventure Hidalgo. Does anybody remember that one? Hundreds of wild horses run free across the Montana prairie in the final scene of Hidalgo. It's a breathtaking scene in a beautiful movie. The spectacular sight lasts only 4 minutes in the film, but those 4 minutes took more than a month of preparation. Montana doubled as China and San Francisco in 1,000 Pieces of Gold. Oklahoma in Far and Away. The son of a tenant farmer, Tom Cruise, and a landowner's daughter, Nicole Kidman, set off together for America with hopes of prosperity. The Cherokee Stripland race is one of the movie's spectacular sequences. Depicting the 1893 Cherokee Stripland race in Oklahoma required the involvement of over 800 extras on 400 horses and 200 wagons on a set that was more than a quarter-mile wide. Director Ron Howard, anxious about the safety of his cast and crew, had trouble getting to sleep that night before shooting began on a 1,200-acre ranch outside of Billings. Fortunately, his fears turned out to be groundless. Almost. And then there was Norway in a popular Norwegian children's movie called Wolf Summer. An angler's paradise, and a river runs through it. Upstate New York and Connecticut in the low-budget thriller Devil's Pond. So I had to put in a lot of these low-budget movies. So, and I had to watch some of these too, and some of them were really hard to find. Some of my, I had to sit there with the old VHS player out and watch find some of these films. But that's anybody ever heard of Devil's Pond? Yeah. Okay. So Montana has dished out a bit of its own history with The Son of the Morning Star, a quadruple Emmy winner, an iconoclastic Rancho Deluxe, and a financially disastrous Heaven's Gate, which we will have to talk about. Does anybody remember Heaven's Gate? Yeah. So Montana has served as a snow-covered no man's land in Clint Eastwood's Firefox and supplied a large building blown to smithereens in Charles Bronson's spy thriller Telephone. Anybody remember Telephone? So real quickly before I read a little more was, so I found, okay, so the earliest version of the Montana Film Office was Travel and Tourism, was part of the Travel and Tourism Department. So the first film commissioner in Montana was a member of Travel and Tourism. He was a photographer. So I was wondering what happened to his stash and his cache of photos. So I went down into the basement on that nondescript kind of brown building over there at the end of Park Avenue, and I found boxes and boxes and boxes of slides. And some of the slides hadn't been seen and never been published, including one of those slides, which I put in the book. If I stand here, can you hear me okay? Okay. Okay. All right, let's do it this way then. Okay. So one of the slides I found was the Paris Gibson High School as it was being blown to smithereens at the actual second in a box full of slides. I found slides of like Jack Nicholson smoking a cigar on the set of... I found photos of Jack Nicholson on the set of the Missouri Breaks smoking a cigarette too. So anyway, I found boxes and boxes of these great photos which made their way into the book. But we'll get to that soon. Sometimes Montana is naturally Montana. Kootenai Falls, the largest undammed falls in Montana, served as a setting for the 1994 film River Wild, starring Meryl Streep, a thriller about a family on a rafting vacation that is tormented by some ruffians and rough water. The River Wild was filmed on two of Montana's whitewater rivers, the Kootenai River near Libby and the Middle Fork of the Flathead River. Testament to Montana's treacherous nature, a rafting sequence in the River Wild almost killed Meryl Streep one August afternoon. So yeah, we almost didn't have Meryl Streep anymore after that little incident. So, going to the Sun Road, the 52-mile scenic road that crosses the Glacier National Park from St. Mary on the east side to Apgar Village on the west, overtakes the opening shots of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. You know? You're shaking your head. You remember that? Yeah. So we had a lot of second unit footage. So second unit footage is film footage that where you don't send the first unit crew with stars and actors and participants. It's usually like shooting aerial photos and aerial sequences. So that's just one of them was in The Shining. Montana also made its way into several films that you would never know, like Jim Belushi, remember him? The comedian from the 80s, he had a movie called Continental Divide. So they'd come out here and shot scenes of migrating raptors, and that turned into, so I put that in the movie too, in the movie book as well. So any second unit stuff. So sometimes you'll see a film like Continental Divide and kind of shake your head and wonder where it is. So I tried to explain where, what sequence got used. So they didn't send a crew here with Belushi and some of the other actors, but they did send some folks to come out and take photos of raptors, and that made its way into the movie too. So the true High Line, that ribbon of remote land from Fort Peck to Shelby, served as a metaphor for the soul-searching done by the main character in the independent film The High Line. Has anybody ever seen that one? Okay. The state has provided scenery for Hollywood successes, The Revenant, Forrest Gump, and some of its most notorious flops, Heaven's Gate, The Missouri Breaks, Oscar winners, Sean Connery and The Untouchables, and future presidents, Ronald Reagan and Cattle Queen of Montana, have read their lines in the state. Montana Productions boasts a high rate of Oscar glory. So I also added in the back of the book all the films connected to Montana that won Oscars, and the Oscar rate for Montana movies is actually quite high. Including Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, Jeff Bridges was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role, and Runaway Train, in which Jon Voight, Best Actor in a Leading Role, and Eric Roberts, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, earned nominations for their stunning performances in this story about two convicts who escape into the icy Northwest wilderness aboard an out-of-control freight train. That's it. Well, that was a mouthful. So that's the intro. That was kind of the intro. And that'll kind of warm us up a little bit for some anecdotes. So I'll try to narrow it down to some that are my favorite, or kind of I think are the most interesting and the most appealing to everybody. So there was a movie called Don't Come Knocking. I was going to kind of start there. Does anybody remember the film Don't Come Knocking? Wim Wenders. So this is great. So page 61. I'm going to skip over to 61. So Don't Come Knocking came out in 2005, and it was filmed in Butte by a German director named Wim Wenders. So he had wanted to shoot a movie in Montana, and he came out and he did it, and it stars Sam Shepard. And Sam Shepard and Jessica Lange in the film is Sam Shepard's estranged wife, or actually former wife. And she owns the M&M in the film. So it's a beautifully shot film. There's some great photos too. In fact, I don't know if you could see that one. This would have been a good idea to have like maybe a slide next time. Here's a shot, can you see that, of Sam Shepard. This is Sam sitting on a couch in this tragicomic scene in which the main character sleeps overnight on a couch in an empty city street. Now, only in Butte, I would think, can you do this, right? So it's an incredible, it's a lovely film. The cinematography is splendid. Butte comes out just absolutely perfectly on film. But the interesting thing with the film, actually, it flopped really, really badly. So it was budgeted for $11 million, but it earned less than $1 million in its first year.
My son was stand-in for Sam Shepard.
Wow. Boy, I got to get his name and number for that when we do the second edition of the book. I'll get him. Yeah. Don't Come Knocking. Yeah. So the interesting thing about Don't Come Knocking was that I found this review by Roger Ebert, and this is really, really fun, where Ebert doesn't believe that a place like Butte could exist, and doesn't believe, he thought the film wasn't believable because the streets were empty, because there was you had this big city, this former grandiose city, and all the streets were vacant. So I thought this was really kind of fun. I was going to read you just a little bit about Roger Ebert's review, and also a couple quotes from some folks in the movie, which I thought were quite interesting. So, there is much to admire in Don't Come Knocking. Reviewers rightfully singled out Wenders and the cinematographer Franz Lustig, who filled the screen with pictures of, quote, shimmering, mirage-like intensity and haunting visual panoramas. Such powerful images make Don't Come Knocking well worth contemplating. Roger Ebert gave it a thumbs up, writing there are scenes that don't even pretend to work, and others that have a sweetness and visual beauty that stops time. Well said. The film manages to capture a semblance of what Butte has become in the 21st century, which perplexed Ebert. This is Ebert, quote, "These people move in intersecting orbits through Butte, a city that seems to have essentially no traffic, and no residents, not in the movie except for a few tavern extras and restaurant customers. Consider a scene where the enraged Earl throws all of his possessions out the window of his second-story apartment and into the street. His stuff remains there, undisturbed, for days. No complaints from the neighbors, no cops. Howard Spence spends a night on the sofa, sleeping, thinking, and smoking. It's a lovely scene." Gabriel Mann, who played Shepard's long-lost son, noted how the cast spent a few days in Butte before shooting to get a feel for the town. And Gabriel said this, "If you can imagine living in a city like that, it's bound to affect your performance." Because most of the population of Butte has vanished, as we know, Sam Shepard noted in the interview, "We didn't have to do any crowd control or set up any roadblocks." So I thought that was kind of fun too. So Heaven's Gate, Heaven's Gate could be its own book and has been its own book, and one of the most financially disastrous films of all time. Does anybody have any personal connection to Heaven's Gate or know somebody who was on the scene or, yeah?
I lived at that end, and a lot of friends were extras. Immigrants wearing woolen outfits on a train scene, and it's 100 degrees, and you're supposed to be freezing.
Sure. So Cimino, had been coming. He was kind of like a Hollywood whiz kid, and he had done The Deer Hunter. So Hollywood, United Artists essentially gave him a blank check to work with Heaven's Gate, which is an icon. Has anybody ever seen Heaven's Gate? Okay. In its entirety, because Cimino released like a 6-hour edition of that. Have you seen all 6? Okay. So Cimino demanded absolute creative control to make the movie. But 6 days into the filming at Glacier National Park, he was 5 days behind schedule and had spent nearly $1 million on only 90 seconds of footage. So the film destroyed Cimino's career and the United Artists studio, yet it may be the most gloriously scenic and meticulously detailed Western ever made. So I was going to read you a little bit about some of the cast members who were involved in the film. They dubbed the entire event Camp Cimino, or also Ayatollah Cimino, just to give you a little perspective about Cimino's mania for realism in the film. So Cimino demanded 52 retakes of a single scene involving Chris Christopherson drunkenly cracking a bullwhip in a hotel room. The shot in the finished film is over in a matter of seconds. I'm not used to doing 57 takes, I'm really not, said actor Brad Dourif. I'm not used to doing a minimum of 32 takes. It was like workshopping on film. We did the happy version, we did the crying version, we did the furious version. So Cimino, we're staying at a place called the Outlaw Inn up in Kalispell, and Cimino decided that the hotel wasn't big enough to suit him, so he asked the owner if they could knock down a wall and make his suite two sizes larger, and the owner of the Outlaw Inn, Bill Cuny, decided sure, and he sent them the bill for it. So Cimino was racking up massive amounts of debt. So United Artists is getting more and more nervous, so they're sending in people to kind of watch Cimino and watch the spending. But Cimino's taking a helicopter and he's from spot to spot within Glacier, and he's trucking in the cast 2-3 hours, one way on each day. So he's running up massive amounts of debt. In fact, the interesting thing is that the budget was like, it's supposed to be $7.5 million, then it went to $11 million, and then it went to a total of $44 million. Yeah, so critics pounced on Heaven's Gate as an unqualified disaster, and the viewing public agreed. But, so ever since, Heaven's Gate has been known as folly or blunder in Hollywood. To this day, like, Cimino is this cautionary example of, like, what not to do with a director and how not to give him absolute creative control and creative freedom, especially financial freedom over a film. So it was interesting, so I talked to several folks, including Jeff Bridges, about the way they looked at the film now and the way they looked at the film then. And here were just a couple interesting kind of quotes. And also I was going to lead you into the fact that a lot of folks today are reassessing Heaven's Gate as a masterpiece. So Cimino just died recently. Time might actually vindicate Michael Cimino for all his perfectionism. So this is from a filmmaker named Michael Epstein. He said, Cimino genuinely believed that he was acting responsibly and that he was going to make a great film and that the studio would get its money back. That didn't happen. Even now, it's seen as an epic failure. It still scares every executive in Hollywood. Cimino's pride and joy had become a carnival. And while the film might have irretrievably hurt his career, it did not rub off on Montana as a location. For one critic noted that Montana came out the star. So that's another thing, no matter how bad the movie, the cinematography always gets singled out as exceptional. So no matter how bad the movie, no matter how bad the reviews, 1 star, half a star, a quarter of a star, Montana always comes out the star in films, which I think is kind of important. So thanks to Cimino's perfectionism, Heaven's Gate is feted by some as a masterpiece. The film was ranked at number 98 in BBC Culture's poll of the 100 greatest American films. At least one cast member, Jeff Bridges, said that Cimino had gotten a bad rap for the film. Michael Cimino, I wonder if I could do a Jeff Bridges impression. Hold on a second here. I'll say, quote, this is Jeff Bridges. Michael Cimino received a lot of bad attention for Heaven's Gate, and undeservedly so, I think, said Bridges recently. I consider it a classic because it really puts you back into what the times must have been like in 1890s Wyoming. The movie is leisurely paced, it's quite slow, but the filmmaking has a rhythm, and I've ended up enjoying it more and more over the years. It's a beautiful film and set at an amazing time in our nation's history. Hiring gunmen to kill European gunmen, those kinds of things. So when the filming of Heaven's Gate ends, Jeff Bridges ends up with a log house that functioned in the movie as a brothel. So to this day, Jeff Bridges still lives in that set piece. And so he dismantled it, and he had it relocated to Livingston near the Beartooth Wilderness. This is Jeff Bridges. This is a great quote. Toward the end of the movie, there was a whorehouse in Heaven's Gate, and Michael Cimino said, "Does anyone want this cabin?" He said that the owner or whoever was going to burn it down. I numbered the logs and took them 400 miles south to Livingston. To this day, I'm living in the Heaven's Gate whorehouse. So, you know, there's a film, sometimes people will ask me what my favorite movie is that has a Montana connection, or it's filmed in Montana, and sometimes it's sort of iconoclastic, not to say like a river runs through it. Personally, I like Evel Knievel with George Harrison in the 70s, but my absolute favorite is a hallucinatory, visionary epic called North Fork. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with North Fork, but it was shot in the early 2000s. And it's just this visionary epic set in 1955 in a small Montana plains town about to be submerged by the opening of an immense dam. At face value, you know, that's what it's about, but it's about so much more. It's about angels and about the transition from birth to death and from life to death. And it's so rich with imagery and symbolism. It's one of the most beautifully made films I've ever seen. And it also requires like second watch, maybe even a third watch, to actually maybe absorb it a little bit more about what's going on. But it also has a tremendous cast too, who, including a gentleman named Nick Nolte. So this is my favorite, actually. This is one of my favorite things here. We could talk about Nick Nolte a little bit here, but I was going to tell you, in this interview, Nolte was talking about his time as Father Harlan. So to set the backdrop a little bit, Nick Nolte almost didn't show up. He had just been filming a movie called The Hulk, and this is about at the time when Nick was having some substance abuse problems. About 2 weeks after North Fork, these pictures showed up in like all the tabloids of Nick Nolte, you know, with the wild hair. He'd been arrested. So he decided that he called up the day before he was supposed to be here, and he tells the directors, "I'm not coming," just in that voice, you know, in the Nick Nolte voice, as gruff as you can imagine, right? So the day of the filming, Nick Nolte shows up, and he has this crucial role as Father Harlan. So Father Harlan's job is basically to watch this boy, this main character, who's going to die. This little boy is going to die with the flood. He's going with the flood. And it's a really powerful, poignant moment in the film. So Nick Nolte takes the role of Father Harlan, and he tells the director, Michael Polish, goes up to Nolte and he says, "Make the congregation cry." And Nick Nolte goes into this this improv script as Father Harlan. So interviewing Nick Nolte, I thought was really interesting. I wasn't really expecting this response. Nick Nolte compared the role of Father Harlan in the movie to his role of witnessing his mother's death. And I thought this was really amazing, so I wanted to share this too. This is Nick Nolte. I'll do my Nick Nolte voice, you know. So I was doing the sermon, and off camera, Mike said to me, "Get the congregation to cry." I had to ad-lib. I could see in this group certain people who had just lost somebody. That was just a feeling. So I just started talking about my mother's death, where I sat with her for 4 days. This whole dialogue. Never consciously realized that to be a witness for a friendship is really a major part of life. Not friends, not enemies, just witnessing. When someone dies, we go out and we cry and say goodbye. The coming and the going and the witnessing of life, that's the purpose of life. It validates, see, each other's existence, lives and existence. Yes, I was here. Achievement does nothing because it vanishes. But the interaction of witnessing is highly emotional for me. That's literally what she had me do, my mother. She wanted me with her for 4 days as she died. Not as a son, because if I was there as a son, I would get into my own grief. She didn't want me to hold her hand, and she wasn't afraid. She wanted someone by her side as a witness. I got to see how you die. It was quite easy. Up to that point, it was an abstract and fearful thing in my life. Something about the film, I know people won't get it too much, by Irwin's little journeys out, Irwin's little journeys out into death and back. Irwin's a little boy. I thought my mother was dead and another big breath would come. I got the distinct feeling that's what I was doing with Irwin, bathing him, being with him, knowing that he is leaving at a certain point. So much symbolism and so many parallels to life. So Christine Schumann, who's a seamstress on the movie, we'll switch this up to something a little lighter. This is actually kind of funny, is that she was transporting Nick Nolte on the set. And Nick Nolte didn't know where he was. So Nick Nolte wanted this seamstress to take him to Mexico. So this is Christine Schumann telling me, yeah, that man who just said something that was so touching and so unnerving and so humbling also showed up quite drunk on the set. So this is the seamstress. She says, Nick Nolte, I was driving him in a motorhome from set to set, and he was mad at everybody and telling everybody to get out. He said, I'm tired of this. Let's go somewhere else. I said, I have to take you to the next place. He said, let's go to Mexico. How much gas do you have in the car? I said. Are you serious? He said, I'm serious. We can get straight across here and down to Mexico. This tank is full of gas, you know? So I said, we can go to the next set and think about Mexico some other time. I am sure he was wondering, who is this cowboy with her cowboy boots telling me I can't go to Mexico? He had his own stash of drink and he did what he wanted, although I let him know he couldn't smoke. So there's also some beautiful, beautiful scenes in the movie in Norfolk of the Fort Peck Dam, too. So if anybody has a chance to see that movie, I'd highly recommend it. I recommend watching it twice. So I try to interview people who had good descriptions and try to keep it interesting enough where people would have fun with the book, but also also bring a little substance and depth and humor to it. And there's a photographer who had this great description of Marlon Brando that I wanted to read to you. It was on the set of the Missouri Breaks, and this is how she observed Marlon Brando. I love this, you know. Marlon Brando's body was going through the motions, awaiting the return of his personality. It was miles away. He was reeling it in like a dancing sailfish. His van was parked by the trees in a grassy field. Inside, it was quiet. The air conditioner diced the air. Minutes had passed since our introduction, but he just sat on the edge of the bed, hands in a drawer, fumbling aimlessly with a hank of wires. He picked up a screwdriver and turned it over carefully. Here was a hero whose vanity had surrendered. Beneath those wide oak stump shoulders was a vast rippling cargo hold of 240 pounds on a 5'10" frame. It was neat enough in here, a small brown space piled high with books on solar energy and Indian history, and his 2 Congos. Cupboards were stacked with fresh T-shirts, clean towels, and the icebox was filled with tab. When at last he found what he was looking for, a cassette tape of Caribbean drum music, he eased across the bed and rested his head against the curtain window. The silvery blonde hair rolled over his ears. That face, he looks like an old medicine man. He appears as unmovable as a city planetarium, with that head balled up, like a clenched fist, that forehead all knotted and complicated. People were embalmed with awe. Beethoven must have had the same air. So I thought that was really, really great. So, Robin Williams, yeah, I love this. This is kind of a tender thing. So Robin Williams is up here for What Dreams May Come. Has anybody ever seen What Dreams May Come? So there were a lot of great anecdotes about Robin Williams as a person, and I just thought this was so important to preserve some of these and include some of these. These are quite touching. So Robin Williams enjoyed bantering with people. He enjoyed communicating with people. He enjoyed telling jokes. He would hop on the bus with people. In between, he would hop on the tour bus, like when there was a break in the action and a break in filming. And so I heard all these great stories about Robin Williams. I just love these, and I just thought they were really, really fun to share. So here's just a couple of recollections of Robin Williams that I think that will make you kind of smile a little bit. So, by the way, Robin Williams was 47 at the time of this filming. This is one of the extras. He says, "I remember What Dreams May Come was shooting at Many Glacier Lodge, and in between takes, Williams would basically do stand-up for the tourists in the balcony of the hotel." Now, how cool would that be, right? Yeah. So he had such a comedic personality, and what was impressive was that he can go from serious acting and quickly turn to telling jokes instead of going to his trailer to rest. So Craig Ironpipe was a stuntman on the film who specialized in horseback scenes, and he was a part of the production crew that helped make the Montana segments happen, and he said this: "I work for the movie company's transportation department. I drove the setup crews and some of the stunt people around, so I'd run into all the main actors all the time and get to visit with them now and then." According to Ironpipe, Williams never ignored the common people around him. In the final days of What Dreams May Come, Williams was on a break from filming, took a red tour bus through the park, and before the cast and crew left, he paid for a party out of his own pocket and invited everyone to it. Then he stuck around and greeted all his guests, regardless of whether they were Hollywood stars or temporary hires. I love that too. This is a quote from Ironpipe. For him to do that, to fork out the money to hire a caterer and put a nice meal and entertain the whole cast and crew, that was something special, said Ironpipe. He was there mingling with everybody. It wasn't just like some millionaire who got a caterer and then went off and did something else. He was right there. It was welcoming, and it was something heartfelt. You could see it in his eyes in the attention he would give you. He was a very kind soul. So Williams, oh, there goes that flip phone. Look at that. Pieces, yeah? So Williams even took a few minutes to greet Ironpipe personally, and this might cause me to get a 21st century phone right now. So Williams even took a few minutes to greet Ironpipe personally and to meet his wife and daughter. The event was a special one for 2.5-year-old Lily Ironpipe. Her favorite movie at the time was Mrs. Doubtfire, Ironpipe said. At the party, I introduced my wife, Billy Joe, to Mr. Williams, and I told my daughter, "This is Mrs. Doubtfire." The little girl looked up dubiously at the strange man in front of her, who was not in costume and looked suspiciously unlike the Scottish nanny from the hit movie. I told Mr. Williams that Mrs. Doubtfire was her favorite movie, so he immediately went into character for a few minutes. You should have seen her eyes brighten up. It was just amazing for her. That was her hero at the time, and there he was right in front of her. It was awesome. Film critic Gene Siskel described What Dreams May Come as, quote, "one of the great visual achievements in film history." The film won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects. When Robin Williams was asked in October 1999 by National Geographic Traveler to name his favorite personal places and spaces, he named Hayman Island off Australia and Glacier National Park. Another place that's soul-inspiring is Montana's Glacier National Park, Williams said. I've never seen anything like it. If it isn't God's backyard, he certainly lives nearby. One man with 1,000 voices brought joy to millions, but he could not sustain it in himself. In 2014, struggling with depression, anxiety, and the early stages of Parkinson's disease, Williams committed suicide. He was 63. Well, that's another downer, isn't it? So, or more upbeat. So, it was fun going back and talking to some, actors and cast and crew who were in different productions. And Lou Gossett Jr. was here a couple times. And I think the importance of the film book and the importance of films in Montana, or films anywhere, is that not only do they instill civic pride and community pride, but they also leave it's a clean industry that leaves a positive impact. And everyone affiliated with that I talked to with this book, whether they were in the movies or they filmed the movies, when they were on either end of the camera, they all had a positive experience. And Lou Gossett Jr. actually did 2 movies here, and he did The Return to Lonesome Dove, and he also did a movie called Digstown. And I just love this, Lou's description of his time in Butte and his time in Montana. And I think that was this kind of sums up, why I wrote the book and why I try to preserve these stories and why the film industry is important. So here's Mr. Lou Gossett Jr., Lou said that the only thing more impressive than the southwestern Montana scenery was the hospitality. Gossett was serious enough about his sentiments to purchase a half-page ad in the newspaper thanking the many people he had befriended. Gossett lodged in Butte during filming and stayed several extra days after shooting was wrapped. Many of the crew members and actors rented homes in Butte for 2 or 3 months instead of staying in motels. Gossett, a lover of a variety of music, said he enjoyed the home of a local musician who had been out of town for the summer and also enjoyed the man's great stereo system. Boy, that's dated, isn't it? Stereo system. Visits to the country club, the YMCA, several restaurants, Copper Kings baseball games, and bowling alleys kept Gossett in the Butte eye. Everywhere, he said, he was treated exceptionally well. I want to come back, said Gossett. That means it's not a short-term relationship. Even with small delays caused by the wet weather, Gossett said the filming had gone well. They're happy with it, said Gossett. We're getting great footage. The scenery can't be matched. You can't paint those mountains, those snow-capped mountains. Gossett, then 56 at the time, joked that he had to bring some quote-unquote bottled smog from Los Angeles to avoid an overdose on clean air so I could live. So I thought that was quite beautiful. So I was thinking, we have about, maybe we could, I could read more. Maybe we could do some questions too if anybody had a couple of questions, So I was trying to jump around a little bit. So does anybody have any questions about any films? Yeah, Little Big Man is in there. Yeah, I've included Little Big Man. Yeah, and so I tried to include every movie that I knew of that I could prove was filmed in Montana, or partly, wholly, or second unit. And it was funny. I actually ended up disqualifying a couple of films because I went on the film office's database and they had certain movies that were on there. And I went back and either found the director or found people who were involved in it, and they said, we've never stepped foot in Montana before. So I actually crossed off a couple of them off the list. So we vetted them. One of them was with like toy soldiers, I guess like an 80s movie. Yeah, it's kind of like a Red Dawn knockoff, something like that. And that was one. And there's another one that's kind of a question mark that I left in there. It was one of Richard Harris's like horse movies. Do you remember he made like Triumphs of a Man Called Horse and They Call Me Horse and Horse Part 2 or Part 4. The director said it's very possible that someone in the crew had driven up to Montana and had filmed some second unit footage, but I've never stepped foot in the state before, so I thought that. Another one too was Red Rocks West with Nicolas Cage, which the director was actually from Billings, Montana. So somehow on the database, it even says to this day that it was filmed in Montana, but it was filmed in Arizona. So we ended up being able to kind of disqualify a couple too, and yeah.
John Dahl?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I think the Lonesome Dove, I was kind of interested that you must have interviewed some of the people because they did the 2 sections.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a lot of that down Dillon.
Right. Right.
And I was in real estate at the time, and the only joke I had there when they filmed it, we had all these people calling, the first one, I want to come live in Montana,
Mm-hmm.
get away from it and all. And then the second one, oh my God, that whole slaughter scene at the end when everybody got killed, and nobody called.
No. Yeah. Yeah. I guess.
Everybody thought they still did.
Yeah, I guess it could go 2 ways, right? Especially depending on the movie. Oh, that's pretty funny. Yeah, think about, you talk about real estate or tourism, and what has done more for travel and tourism in the state of Montana than a river runs through it. I think that residual effect will be everlasting and perennial. I don't think there's ever been a movie that turned people away from Montana, per se, unless anyone can think of one. I think, like I said, it's kind of fun to note that even the movies that, small budget movies or movies with lesser budgets, they still end up getting singled out for the cinematography. And that's kind of a fun thing too, is that if the critics don't like the movie and they pounce on the movie, they always say, well, Red Lodge was beautiful on film and it transposes well on film. So Montana always gets a compliment.
I know you probably had Red Skies over Montana.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How much of that was filmed in Montana?
you know, most of it, I think, and I have to go back to the book, and because I remember some of these, but I don't really talk about Red Skies in Montana all that much. I think a bulk of that was filmed up on the 9 Mile, but I have all the shooting locations in there, and I had to actually purchase some photos of some smoke jumper scenes because I couldn't find any at the Historical Society. So I found a few from like an archival movie footage company, and they had photos of smoke jumpers training for Red Skies of Montana, or firefighters, and up on the 9 Mile. And I found some older ones too. There were some old film, there's like a railroad movie called Danger Lights from the 1930s. So the beauty of it now is like with eBay and other places, you can find like old cassette tapes of movies from the 30s, or movies that you can't even find on DVD. Danger Lights was one from the 1930s, but the first one, it looks like, and I think the film office is in agreement, the first one, let me check the year. I think it's 1897. I have it in here, but my memory's not as sharp, when it comes to this book because it's so thick, So the first one is Last Train to Livingston, which was like a tourist piece that was shot here. Yeah, it was shot around, I had the year as 1897. That's the one we kind of agreed on, so, which is pretty amazing. It was more like a tourist kind of, it was a tourism video, so that, I guess that counts as probably the first, as the first production, so, And it's interesting because like the productions in the 70s, they were powerhouse. I mean, they were, big film companies, big names. From like 2000 to today, I mean, the budgets have gotten much smaller. But this is like kind of like proving ground and like a testing ground for a lot of really good, like young filmmakers. So it's funny, if you look in IMDb, or you look in like the database at the movies filmed in Montana from say 2000 to 2015, or even today, a lot of them have people whose names you'd recognize for other projects, which is really interesting. So you can kind of go back and see how maybe they came out here to shoot a movie at the airport in Bozeman for $15,000, and now they're working on, big budget, multi-million-dollar budget films. So Montana still has virtually every type of terrain imaginable. And like I said, I thought the fun part was all the places that Montana is served for. There was a little scene movie called Josh and Sam, where Montana doubled as like 90 different places, from like Calgary, all the Billings. Billings served as like Calgary, Dallas, and then they did this road trip together, and they managed to shoot it convincingly just around Montana. So without ocean and maybe desert, we have just about every type of terrain that we can shoot in. So
I wanted to ask if you mentioned at all any of the TV shows that have been filmed.
it's a good, the TV shows were interesting. There were a lot more, and I had to cut it off. I think with books, there's definitely not just a time frame, but there's a word count. And this at this size, like this 8.5 by 11, came out to a couple hundred pages. If it were 6 by 9, it would have been over 400 with photos. So the publisher and I, we kind of agreed we have to cut out commercials, maybe small documentaries, and maybe some of the TV series. So unfortunately, unless there's some space, maybe that could be shot in Montana, like the sequel or something like that. We could add some of those. Volume 2, and which there are many, and some good ones. But I tried to put in like the most prominent and the most well-known ones, and the most renowned ones. So.
I'm thinking of Yellowstone, obviously, as the biggest, newest one.
Yeah, and Yellowstone, so I had the chance to go down onto the set of Yellowstone about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and it was just such an exciting time. And I think what I enjoy the most about movies, again, is that residual benefit, but it's the community benefit. It's like, it's the lady who's driving Kevin Costner and has this like great story about transporting him from set to set and scene to scene, and all these kind of wonderful stories about the experience and all the friendships, and it's always positive, and always just kind of, it's a feel-good industry and a clean industry, and an industry that wants to thrive here and wants to succeed. It just needs a little boost in the right direction, and it needs a little assistance too. So, but yeah, Yellowstone again, has also renewed the interest in Montana as a shooting and filming location, and there are a couple other ones going on right now. So I think we'll be seeing some more in the next couple of weeks and months. So. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's our taxing or whatever, because I think Canada has
Right.
gotten an awful lot of the
Right.
business that Montana would. So
It's true.
what's your feeling on
Well,
why we're not getting some of those shows?
I've spent, the last couple, so a significant amount of time in New Mexico, and like Santa Fe has its own film office, and Las Vegas has its own. Las Vegas, New Mexico, a small town, probably had more movies filmed there in this small town than have ever been filmed in Montana. So they embrace the industry wholeheartedly, and they give them everything that they want up front. They give them the incentives. So I think what happens, we look at it, we don't look at the benefits as well as we should. I think we look at the payment up front, or maybe like a cut, or maybe some aid, or maybe some assistance, but we don't look at like the long-term kind of residual benefits, like in Yellowstone.
We used to have some kind of incentive.
We do, and I think, and
I think we used to have a much bigger one, and I
I-
think the legislature cut it.
they did cut it, they did cut it, yeah. It's gotten smaller and smaller, and it's got cut more and more, so I think the attitude in places like New Mexico, and another big hotbed for filmmaking is Georgia. So I think the idea now, I think more movies are coming to Georgia and New Mexico. It's like, okay, you come here, we're going to give you this break, we're going to give you this lien, we're going to give you this assistance, but we're going to get it back, because with Yellowstone, they're going to keep coming. I mean, it was interesting when on the set of Yellowstone how many people not only were employed, but how many places like all the cast were going, and the prop people, they were going all up and down like the Bitterroot Valley, buying antlers, and buying all kinds of different different pieces, and stoves, and different types of things to contort to the film and contort to the plot. So all kinds of props, whether they be like antique mirrors, and a lot of it are the things we don't see. Like when the film crews come into town, they spend money on things that might not be obvious. I mean, we know there's food, we know there's lodging, but it's also going to be, they're going to go to like massage therapists, and they're going to go to like the optometrist, believe it or not, and they're going to be there for 2-3 months. So they're going to set up their life there too. So it's going to be not only just the caterers, but it's going to be the florists, and it's going to be all kinds of different people who are going to benefit, and who are going to be in this partnership. So again, yeah, I think the incentives are needed, yeah, and they're much needed, because if you don't get them, so there was a movie called The Ballad of Lefty Brown, which is like this noir western that was filmed in Bannock a couple of years ago. It's a beautiful, another beautifully shot film, shot in the fall time in Bannock. So the director and one of the stars, Bill Pullman, who has roots here and a connection, they pushed hard to keep it in Montana, because Calgary had offered, another place, had offered tremendous incentive to film The Ballad of Lefty Brown in the Calgary area. So, but Bill Pullman was committed to it, the director was committed, and they shot it here they got some grant money, maybe a couple $100,000 in grant money, and just did it as cheaply and as frugally as they possibly could. But it's sort of a tragedy, is that, okay, there was a movie a couple of years ago called Cut Bank, and the tagline for Cut Bank was "Where Hope Goes to Die." So I think they give you kind of an indicator on what kind of movie it is. So Cut Bank was not filmed in Cut Bank, Montana. It wasn't filmed anywhere near Cut Bank. In fact, nobody came to Cut Bank. Nobody came to Scout. They went right to Edmonton. So they shot it up in Edmonton. So if you watch the film Cut Bank, which is supposed to be Cut Bank, Montana, and you see the field, and you see all the scenery and all the beautiful imagery and cinematography, you're actually looking at Canada. So how great would it have been if when the phone call was made and they said, well, we're going to come and bring Cut Bank here, like, what can you do for us? And if someone at the other end said, well, I can give you 35% here, I can give you this up front, we can do all this, let's work together and let's make this happen. The only person who ended up coming through Cut Bank was like John Malkovich apparently came through and hung out at a diner in Cut Bank. But the town itself really embraced the movie. They actually showed the movie, our Cut Bank. They showed it at the hangar at the airport. So, I mean, that's how excited they were. They weren't even in it. They got knocked out. They didn't even film it here. But Cut Bank embraced the movie, and they ended up filming it. They ended up showing it at a hangar in Cut Bank. So, but imagine if those things had happened. I mean, you always think of the ones that got away, right? I mean, and one of them that's most bitter, and I think the one that really hurts people the most, I mean, you could see it in their eyes when discuss it, I mean, their eyes start to water a little bit, is Legends of the Fall. Yeah. So that's one where we scouted, for months and months, and we lost that one. Another one is, I think like the HBO, did the HBO do Undaunted Courage? I think that was one too. A big Lewis and Clark, Big Lewis and Clark adventure series, and they didn't do that here. But I think Legends of the Fall really hurt because they ended up taking it to Winnipeg. I think there's some photos of it like in Winnipeg. So you think about losing a lot of these things. I mean, how much more vibrant would it be? I mean, there are 100 movies in there. Would it be more vibrant and dynamic, and we all have a greater connection to film if there were 200? Yeah, I mean, probably we would, but yeah.
There was a movie shot, I don't know if it was in Livingston, but isn't there a sound, didn't they leave a sound stage in Livingston?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, Livingston has a little bit of everything. A lot of times when the movies do come, they do leave things. And it's not uncommon that's another value too, which is a good segue for me, not knowing your question, but talking about something else that's kind of, similar and still seeming smart at the same time, is that, like there was a film, there are several movies, they will leave things, they'll leave gazebos. They'll make a place better. Like when they shot Jimmy P., Psychotherapy of a Plains Indian in 2012, up in like East Glacier and Browning, like the film crews worked on these old roundhouses, and they added all kinds of different elements into the structure, and they left all the structures better than they were when they got there. So you see that a lot of times in film where it's not going to get worse. When the film crews come in and the film crews leave, you're going to notice a marked difference in contrast in your community, in your town, and they're going to leave things better. So.
I think there was a movie in Billings, maybe Ryan can remember, Henry Winkler was in it, about the children's TV series
Yeah.
Frog.
Yeah, that's a true story, yeah. That's a true story about the kidnapping of a puppet. Do you guys know that story? And let me see if I could, A Plum Summer. Maybe I could, that's actually alphabetically the first, I listened to a lot, alphabetize them. Oh no, okay, that's number 2, but that is that's a fun story. This is a true story about the kidnapping of a puppet. It's a fictionalized tale of a real kidnapping of a puppet, and the puppet was actually found with parts of it strewn along a fence line. Do you know this story? Okay, well, I'll just give you like a little bit about the frog napping caper that took place. So this is it. A Plum Summer is a fictionalized tale of a real kidnapping that took place in Billings. The victim was a TV puppet named Froggy Doo on the Happy Herb and Froggy Doo Show, a popular regional children's TV show that premiered on the small screen in Great Falls in 1955 and moved to Billings in 1963. The actual frog napping case took place in Billings in 1966. So yeah, there is we have some quirky movies. I mean, and that's one of them, is A Plum Summer. And so yeah, we've got from the sublime to the silly. I mean, we've had it all. In fact, there is a movie called The Patriot, which was not the blockbuster with Mel Gibson, but another movie with Steven Seagal. And that movie was beleaguered by all kinds of problems with the militia. The militia of Montana actually showed up on the set of The Patriot and infiltrated the set. Somehow they got wind of the script. So in the movie, in The Patriot, it's filmed, it actually takes place in the town of Innis. It's filmed in the town of Innis, but in the movie, the town of Innis is attacked by like biological spores and like chemical spores by this militia of Montana. So the militia of Montana somehow were privy to the script, and they didn't want to be depicted as a bunch of wackos and nut jobs, so they started sending in infiltrators, and they threatened to contaminate the food and burn down the set. So, and that's a true story. So what happens is the FBI is there. The FBI has to show up on the set and protect, the cast and the crew from all these death threats. And they were legitimately sending in people to infiltrate. In fact, one of the casting directors told me this great story. She said, yeah, so I get these guys coming in, and they look good. They're like, these guys are like perfect as extras. They look like the militia. And then I say, you're hired. And I ask for the paperwork, and they threw a fit, and they said, and then they walked away. So they were thinking that they could have been infiltrators. So they were good infiltrators because they looked like the real deal. So they were sending in imposters to come and get into the set. So I thought that was interesting too. So we've had everything from the sublime to the silly, to the outrageous, to the goofy, and all the good stuff in between. So, and on both ends. So.
I have a little story to tell. Back when Return to Lonesome Dove was making casting calls,
Mm-hmm.
I made application, and then they said they needed men in a certain age range too, so I put in an application for my ex-husband, who was a long-haul trucker.
Uh-huh.
Well, he got the call to be an extra. And because he missed the first time, he thought he couldn't make it because he was on the road and he didn't get enough notification to notify his boss that he had to be there. So he thought that was gonna be it. He wasn't really excited about the job anyway. But he got called again. So he did go down to Virginia City, and they suited him up. He was in a bar scene as an extra, and in the movie he's blurred. You can't make him out. But I do have a picture which was kind of against the rules, but
Sure.
some guy down there took a picture
Sure.
of him in
Sure.
his outfit and stuff. And then he told me when he got home, he said, they fed him lunch. He said for how many hours, it was a very long, it was an all-day thing, just for that few seconds.
Oh,
In
fun.
the bar.
Yeah, sure.
$60 wasn't worth it. He was don't ever come back to me.
60. Yeah. Well, that's fun. I think that's one of the fun things about the book is, I tried to find not only major players and people who were obviously identifiable or obviously identified with the movie, but other supporting cast members or just people behind the stage, different people who worked on sets. And the interesting thing too is that a lot of these folks start off maybe as like the smallest, lowest kind of common denominator role on a movie crew and go on to do great things, and we see that a lot. So I mean it's been a great employer for a lot of people who have had the chance to go on a movie set in the 70s and work as a grip, who are just working and active and employed in Hollywood full time. So yeah.
What was the movie that Raquel Welch played, Indian Native?
Oh yeah,
Put in
yeah,
the paper and
yeah.
looked for an extra, or like, how many people in Montana are playing?
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's the one I didn't include. I know exactly which one it is. I can't think of it right now. It might come to me in about 2 minutes, but that was one of the ones that just didn't make the cut too. Yeah, it could have.
It was filmed in Montana.
It was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was funny looking for an extra for her.
Yeah.
Do any movies come to mind that were centered or had significant scenes in Helena itself? If I remember correctly, Legends of the Fall has a scene in Helena, but I guess that apparently wasn't filmed in Helena.
No. No. Yeah, because we ended up. So I ran everything by like the former film commissioners and the scouts, and yeah, not a single moment in that movie. Yeah, sad, right? But there are.
Came and did a lot of research in the photo archives.
They did.
That
Yeah.
we thought was gonna be, one of the deals was that we had that walking wall.
Oh yeah,
So
sure,
it was too intrusive, how they wanted those buildings to look.
sure.
And the steam grates,
Oh,
they wanted the steam coming out.
Sure,
and the heat,
sure.
When it was cold, and those weren't in existence anymore.
Yeah. It's funny because, as far as Helena, there was a guy that came here in the 70s. This is great too. This is on more like the quirky, more eccentric end of the film industry in Montana. There was a guy named Charles Pierce, who was a B movie director, and he did several movies in Montana over the course of like 3 years, like Winterhawk, and he did something called like Gray Eagle, and Gray Eagle was filmed in the Helena area. And he did, like I said, he came back and he did another one up in Kalispell. And Pierce was like the most popular guy on like the drive-in movie theater circuit in the 70s. He came out with all these movies about Boggy Creek and and Sasquatch and they played to a big audience in Arkansas where he was from and out in his area. And he came out and he did Winterhawk, and he also did that Gray Eagle, and he did another one called Winds of Change, or Winds of Autumn. And so Charles Pierce loved it out here, and he did Gray Eagle out here. He shot that out here. And the fun thing about Pierce is that years later, Pierce went on to find success in mainstream Hollywood. His biggest movie, he directed a film called Sudden Impact with Clint Eastwood. And Pierce, as a little boy, had a dad who could be quite fastidious and had all these great lines. Anytime that Pierce would look up at Dad and test him a little bit and test his patience or test his mettle, his dad would look down at him and he'd say, "Go ahead, make my day." So that came actually from Pierce. You know, Pierce said it on the set to Clint Eastwood, and then Clint Eastwood ad-libbed it in the film Sudden Impact. So another connection to Montana somehow with Clint Eastwood. So yeah, so.
My memory of Winterhawk is that you could see jet trails in the sky.
Right. Yeah, you know, what happened, you know, Pierce wasn't fastidious with details. I mean, there are several scenes where there's a razor wire fence, there's electric fencing. I think there might even be a car dealership in one of the scenes in the background. But the actor who was in Winterhawk, Michael Dante, I had a chance to talk to him. He's alive and well and doing great in his 80s. And yeah, he just had some great memories of being out in Montana. And you know, back in the day when I guess it was more commonplace for, Italians and other ethnic people to play Indian roles. So it's a lot of these movies are worth it watching just for the camp value alone and the shock value and just the intrigue of just watching 70s movies and 80s movies and how some of them just don't age very well. But they're ours, you know. And it's sort of like I have a more paternalistic approach to the movies in Montana. You know, I feel like they're all ours, you know. And I'll kind of have an affinity and an affection for them in some way. So, yeah. Well, what do you guys think? You guys want to?